This Wednesday, the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability will hold a hearing on UAPs, or what is commonly referred to as UFOs, a national topic that has been the subject of stigma and jokes, except Congress is no longer laughing. It turns out the government has been hiding something from the American people and our lawmakers in Congress for decades. The truth that we are not alone, and that the CIA, along with other federal agencies, has been spending trillions in taxpayer dollars to fund UAP programs so secret that some presidents and secretaries of defense have not even been told about them. Tonight, we are joined by Christopher Sharp of the Liberation Times, who has uncovered how this has been hidden from Congress, the American public, and the rest of the world. Is the United States government involved in recovering and reverse engineering craft of non-human origin, otherwise known as UAP?
My understanding, yes.
And these craft are not just recovered on land, correct?
Allegedly, yes.
You state that we are recovering UAP on foreign soil and in many cases collaborating with our allies, and in some cases our adversaries in these operations. Who are these countries?
I have been informed that historically, on at least one occasion, there was collaboration with Russia. I don't know the full circumstances behind that.
How confident are you in your sources and what they are telling you about all of this?
I'm very, very confident in what my sources are telling me. And the article was checked through by multiple sources before it was released to check for any inaccuracies.
This sounds like an enormous undertaking. Is this being hidden from our lawmakers in Congress and the American people?
To a certain extent, yes. From lawmakers, from the American public, 100% it's all being hidden, yes.
And what agency is most involved with this?
The CIA.
You note that the CIA's interest in alleged non-human materials dates back to before World War II with the Office of Strategic Services, or OSS. What can you tell us about that?
Yes. So from what my sources tell me, there was, and what I can confirm actually, that there was, because there is documentation, there was something called the McGregor Project, which was to expedite the surrender of Italy during World War II. And during that mission, I believe they had intelligence that there was a craft of non-human origin that had been recovered in Magenta, Italy.
And this craft was transferred to the United States?
So the records do show through the microfilms that were preserved by the person who headed up this project, William Donovan. It does show that the McGregor project got transferred to R&D. I believe R&D meant the research and development branch of the OSS at the time. And I believe that craft, either through the OSS or through another US agency, was transferred to Wright Field in America, where work commenced on exploiting the technology alongside German and Italian scientists and engineers.
What do we know about this non-human craft in Magenta, Italy? What was the description of it?
The description is unclear in my eyes. There's various claims about what it looked like, what it was. There are claims that there were bodies recovered as part of the crash of beings that looked Nordic, and the Italians mistook them as Germans and thought the craft was actually a Wunderwaffe, which crashed in Italy. But I do have a source whose, I think, his great-great-grandfather was a podesta in that area and had heard about the crash occurring. And that's in support of documentation that allegedly came from the Mussolini government, basically saying there needs to be a media blackout about this craft that has crashed.
You note that this effort to reverse engineer it was closely tied to the Manhattan Project?
According to my sources, yes, this was allegedly connected to the Manhattan Project. I've been informed that it was being studied by the Atomic Energy Commission, working alongside the Italian and German engineers and scientists. And I've also been informed as well that the study was transferred partially to the Central Intelligence Group, which is the father of the CIA. And that was because the Foreign Intelligence branch of the Manhattan Project was transferred to the Central Intelligence Group.
Was there any doubt that this craft was not made by humans?
No, there was no doubt, according to my sources.
So the classified UAP retrieval and reverse engineering program run by the CIA can actually be traced all the way back to the Central Intelligence Group.
OSS and Central Intelligence Group, correct.
So what is the WCPMC?
So that is the CIA's Weapons and Counter-Proliferation Mission Center. So it can actually trace its lineage back to the aspect of the Manhattan Project that was transferred over to the Central Intelligence Group. And from my understanding, it's working with combat support agencies. It tracks and it analyzes UAP in all domains. So that's space, air, and within the ocean as well.
Is the Weapons and Counterproliferation Center in the CIA, are they the main directorate that are in charge of this whole issue?
I would say that it's very, very decentralized. However, I would say if you want to track back the CIA's lineage and its involvement in UAP, goes back to the Weapons and Counter-Proliferation Mission Center. So that's ground zero. Over the years, the roles have changed, the government's changed, but back in the day, as my source put it, the Central Intelligence Group and the CIA in its early days was the only game in town when it came to UAP.
And multiple directorates within the CIA are at the center of it as well. Who are they and what do they do?
Sure. So for example, the Directorate of Science and Technology have historically been involved. So 4 aspects of their involvement cannot be disclosed to me due to the sensitivities. However, they do, one of their roles is to protect the technologies derived from the craft that have been captured or that have been recovered. Another one at the center of it is the Directorate of Operations and aspects within that, such as the maritime branch. So all the retrieval missions, from my understanding, legitimate retrieval missions of Russian objects and Chinese objects and UAP, although different aspects of the DoD may be involved, the CIA is always involved coordinating things through its Directorate of Operations.
Last year in the Daily Mail, you wrote about the CIA's Office of Global Access, a super secret office that exists within the Directorate of Science and Technology. How do they play a part in the UAP crash retrieval operation?
Sure, yes. So that's now a mission center in its own right. So it's been renamed since then. And they play a peripheral role from my understanding, but they have played a role. Its main role is like a delivery service, delivering and taking back materials and assets that are very, very sensitive in very, very difficult climates and hostile climates. So that's its main role, but it has been involved in UAP recovery as well, yes.
And how does the CIA find these crashed UAPs?
So, from my understanding, they are tracked through the National Reconnaissance Office, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, and also the National Security Agency as well, who provide all sorts of different data from signals intelligence to geospatial intelligence, basically. So they're all feeding in with the information so that they're able to track them. So yeah, that's how they are actually tracked. I mean, there are also allegations as well that some of these things are shot down. But obviously I haven't written a full story about that yet, and there's more information to yield from that accusation.
You're saying that the United States military has shot down UAP?
Allegedly.
Who are some of the other federal agencies that are involved in the recovery of these craft? We spoke earlier about these things are picked up not just on the ground, but in other domains as well. How does that work?
So, in terms, so for instance, in terms of the undersea retrieval missions, that would involve the National Underwater Reconnaissance Office, working with various aspects of special operations, and the US Navy's Office of Naval Research, working together and coordinating and using recovery vessels and reconnaissance vessels in order to retrieve the materials that have actually been discovered. There are various aspects involved, as I said as well. Subterranean missions, they would involve the US Army, but at the center of all these, coordinate everything, is the CIA's Directorate of Operations in some capacity.
And how specifically does the Pentagon figure into this entire UAP recovery and reverse engineering program? What role do they play?
Sure. So you've got your, you've got places like the National Reconnaissance Office and National Security Agency and National Intelligence Agency tracking these things and helping with the efforts to recover them. And then obviously as well, you've got your JSOCs, Special Operations, helping provide logistics and security around these sites. And then there is collaboration between aspects of the Department of Defense and the CIA that will actually decide which contractor gets the materials. And then in terms of reverse engineering, so at least in the modern day, the materials basically belong to the Department of Defense. And the prime executives, when it comes to decision making in terms of materials, is the DoD and the contractors that have them.
You note that the U.S. and China have exchanged tracking data on UAP. Do you know, does this continue to this day, this sharing of intelligence information?
I'm unsure if it happens to this day, but historically, when relationships were normalized with China, under Nixon, there was collaboration between the CIA and wider intelligence community and the the Chinese Communist Party, and they had listening posts, for example, I believe CIA's, and this is all open source information, that there was collaboration between the Chinese and the Americans. And from my understanding, from what I've been told, they were also tracking objects as well and sharing information. But I'm unsure if that happens to this date. And I'd also point out that collaboration between the United States, Russia, and China is nothing new, at least from like a military perspective, in terms of exercises against piracy and whatnot. But I'm also told that type of relationship carries on in terms of intelligence collection as well.
So I take it China has their own UAP classified program.
Correct. And that's on record as well. That's being reported by the South China News. So, yeah.
And do we have any idea how China's UAP program compares to, in size and scope, compared to the U.S.'s undertaking?
We know that they're using artificial intelligence to track UFOs. That's open source information. But from my understanding, they're able to work at a larger scale in terms of reverse engineering efforts, because they're able to keep the secrecy locked down a lot more due to it being an authoritarian state. So I believe they have made a lot of progress in terms of reverse engineering and exploiting the craft.
Our sources have told us that much of this is classified within the Department of Energy as trans-classified foreign nuclear information. Can you tell us a bit more about the DOE's involvement?
Yeah, of course. So historically, the Magenta craft allegedly became part, let's say, of the Manhattan Project study. And then it moved over to the Atomic Energy Commission. And from my understanding, the DOE has access to the materials, and it is primarily interested in the propulsion technology, whereas the DoD will be interested in other aspects like how it's made, the structure, maybe weapons technology as well. And the CIA would be interested in origins. And from my understanding, they are aware that these are non-human intelligence and multiple non-human intelligence, multiple origins. So they also classify the types of non-humans are actually piloting and controlling these crafts and what their intent is as well.
So you're saying that there are multiple species that are apparently visiting us on Earth?
Allegedly, yes. And I've been told that by multiple sources that are of high standing.
Do you think that they are studying alien bodies?
I do, yes.
You reported that many crashed UAPs are actually handed over to government defense contractors. Who are these contractors, and who decides what contractor gets these vehicles?
Oh, so they range from the Aerospace Corporation to BAE Systems, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon. But for what I'm told, it's who. I mean, this is a very, very complex situation in terms of who gets them. There could be prior agreements and whatnot. But I was given an example of something that was covered with collaboration from Russia, which is quite unbelievable. But that was retrieved from the ocean, and CIA structure of operations, along with the Department of Defense, elements involved, they need to decide which contractor that goes to. And to a certain extent, it will depend about the capabilities of the craft, or the suspected capabilities of the craft. So if it had underwater propulsion, for example, and it was, and it didn't crash from the sky, then you would say, okay, this is something that's submersible. So you would send it over to General Dynamics, for example, that has experience working with submersibles. But if it actually crashed into the ocean and it was trapped coming from space, okay, then you would need to have a look at your Lockheed Martins and whatnot, who would be able to be in a better position to exploit the technology.
Have you heard a figure as to the number of crashed UAPs in defense contractors' possession?
No, I haven't heard any numbers firsthand. I mean, that there is speculation that it's around, I don't know, around 70 or something like that. There is speculation, but I really have no idea how many they do actually have.
UAPs that are recovered from our oceans, who picks them up and where do they go to be studied?
So they're picked up by what happens is that the CIA's naval branch, maritime branch, and special operations operators from the Department of Defense are involved, along with the Office of Naval Research, using submersibles from Woods Hole. When these craft are recovered, they're in the custody of the Office of Naval Research, who then allegedly transfers them to a contractor.
You previously wrote that Lockheed Martin wanted to actually divest themselves from a craft in their possession, but the CIA Director of Science and Technology blocked it. Who is this person, and do you know why this technology transfer was blocked?
According to my sources, the person is allegedly Glenn Gaffney, former director of science and technology within the CIA. And it was blocked. I mean, my best guess in terms of why it was blocked is because the CIA and the Directorate of Technology has to protect the technology that could be derived from it from getting in the wrong hands. However, the argument is also made that the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology was also the original custodian of the materials, which allegedly date back to the 1950s. And Lockheed Martin had really done all they can to exploit the technology they could from these materials. And they could get no further because they had an issue with attracting enough top talent to actually study the materials. So they wanted to get it out of Lockheed Martin to other scientists and engineers so they could have a fresh look at the materials.
Can you walk us through how a typical UAP crash recovery operation happens from when it is first detected?
I mean, there's a lot of conjecture about that. But from my understanding, it is tracked using the National Reconnaissance Office and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, using their resources and analysis and data to track these objects. NORAD may be involved as well. And what happens is that once they land or crash, a team is then ordered to go to site. Like we reported with the Office of Global Access story, it is dependent on which resources are closest sometimes, and you have to be pragmatic and make do with what you've got in the closest location. Especially if there are foreign powers also vying to get to these sites as well. And then from there, there'll be elements of the DoD, elements of CIA, and allegedly as well, although I've not been able to verify this with multiple sources, I don't feel confident saying it yet, but allegedly, according to at least one source, the DOE is involved as well, and they send their own assets to the site.
So if we have been collaborating on occasion with our foreign adversaries regarding the recovery of UAPs, it sounds as if this could potentially be not only a threat to the United States, but the world.
I don't understand the full background in terms of what happened with Russia, but this was after the fall of the Soviet Union, from my understanding, when tensions had thawed to a certain extent with the USA. and that Russia, was in a dark time, especially in terms of resources it had with its military. So that was the situation at the time. Obviously, there have also been allegations made publicly that Russia and the US had been working on the issue of UAPs since the detonation of a nuclear weapon in space, where allegedly an object did crash from the sky. So there is the allegation. I think it first came from Tom DeLonge, from my understanding, that the Russians and the Americans were likely in the same room. So it is a global issue. And there is some cooperation to a certain extent. However, when it comes to reverse engineering, exploiting the technology, the collaboration mostly stops there.
Last year at the congressional hearing, whistleblower David Grush alleged that we are actually in a Cold War with our adversaries to reverse engineer this technology. Do you think that's true?
To a certain extent, yes. Probably more so now than 80 years ago.
What sort of questions should Congress be asking at this hearing this week?
I think that Congress needs to ask about Glenn Gaffney and ask about the allegations of him blocking the transfer of materials. I think people should be asking about the retrieval operations, and I think people need to be really, really pointed with their questions in terms of the involvement of JSOC, the Weapons and Counter-Proliferation Mission Center. And I think the names need to be named in terms of those who have not been cooperative, such as former directors and deputy directors of science and technology within the CIA. I think they need to go into real detail about what is actually occurring. They need to be forensic in terms of their questioning, like you are. From top to bottom, how does this thing work in terms of how they're retrieved? What are the units involved? Give us some examples of operations that have been conducted. That kind of stuff. The real telled questions.
Why do you think they have been hiding this from Congress?
Because they've been hiding this in Congress because, what I'm going to say is quite controversial, but I believe that they believe that they're doing their jobs and that they're protecting the interests of the USA, which is their job. They're protecting the materials from foreign actors looking to steal the technology and use it against Americans and its allies. So I feel that they are doing their jobs and they are acting patriotically. But by doing so as well, I believe that there are threats and dangers to people asking for more transparency and people that do believe that the reality at least needs to be acknowledged, and who believe that the reverse engineering programs need to be widened and opened up to more talent, such as engineers and scientists working within SpaceX, who are actually attracting the best talent now and stealing the best talent away from Lockheed Martin. So I believe as a result of that, the Western world basically is suffering the consequences. And should China exploit key technologies before the US because of that, I think that puts a lot of people in danger.
The officials in these various agencies that have been a part of or directed this retaliation against whistleblowers or journalists, should they be exempt from prosecution?
People that have made threats, yes. People that have actually been involved in murders, in assassinations, no. They should not get any protections.
You mentioned that people that have been trying to get this in front of Congress, whistleblow per se, have put themselves in danger. Can you elaborate on that?
There have been allegations that whistleblowers, dating back years now, whistleblowers have potentially been killed and basically taken out of the equation
Killed.
before they could speak up. That is the allegation. It's a very, very serious allegation. And I feel that it needs to be properly investigated before actually presenting it as a fact, because they are so serious. And I believe that threats are being made as well against other whistleblowers to this day, not to speak out because of the sensitivity. But as I said, there are people who do believe that they are patriots and they believe in keeping secrets, and they believe that it's in the best interest of USA to protect these secrets. However, like I was saying, there is a very, very good case to actually be transparent to a certain extent while still maintaining that secrecy as well.
Are journalists being threatened?
Yes, journalists are being threatened.
Are you worried for your safety?
Yes, I am worried for my safety.